I'm Matt.
Hey, I'm Steve.
Hey, I'm John.
This is the Sober Friends Podcast. We're here for the sober curious, the new guy, and the old timer. We're here to talk about the stuff anyone looking to live alcohol-free has to face day to day, and how we overcame those struggles. We speak for no 12-step group, but we do try to remain anonymous. You're not alone. This is the Sober Friends Podcast.
When we put the booze down, it doesn't mean that life stops happening. Good things happen in our life, bad things happen in our life. The difference is when we find recovery, we have the skills to get through that bad stuff without taking a drink. And we're going to sort of talk about that tonight because Steve lost a family member recently, and he has shared in a meeting something that hit home for me, and I hope it hits home for you as well. Steve, what's going on?
Hey, Matt, good to be back. We haven't done this for a couple of weeks now, so like you said, it feels like you take a week off. It feels like forever. You know?
Yes, it does.
And it is a long time. It's like 2 weeks by the time you get back to it, so it's a long time.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I like to dedicate this podcast to my brother Rich C., who was one of us. He struggled with his own addictions, alcoholism. He was also, a drug user. So I lost him on June 2nd of a heart attack. So yeah, there's a lot to it. It's, it's a tough thing. It was a complicated relationship with my brother and I, as many family relationships are,
Sober or not sober.
Right. Absolutely.
They can be complicated.
I was listening to another podcast. So I actually listened to an interview, Kristen Bell, right?
Mm-hmm.
We both love Kristen Bell.
What's not to like, Steve?
Listen, you don't have to tell me. And her husband, Dax Shepard, has a podcast. Many people know, Armchair Expert. And anyway, she was talking about their relationship, and she was talking about their partying and their drug use. No, she wasn't talking specifically about drug use, but she made a comment that we all get off the highway at different exits. And what she was talking about was she got off that party train earlier than he did. Okay. And I thought that was a beautiful way to put it, that they were together, but yet, and he's had struggles. He had a relapse a couple of years ago that was pretty public and stuff like that. So my brother and I, we were both alcoholic. He had a problem, noticeably had a problem before I did. I mean, I can remember him going to rehab and things like that. And he was in and out of recovery for years and years and years, in and out. And one of the things I did share is that because my brother was at times your typical trench coat alcoholic, right? And I shared that my brother actually lived in the woods. And my brother was a big guy. He was about 6'2", but always sort of heavy, but big, brawny guy. And he had this big beard. And I mean, he was like the guy you see. He lived in the woods in a tent for a while. And then I always said that sort of kept me in my addiction because I was able to look at him and go, well, I'm not that. Yeah, so what? I'm drinking alone in my basement, but I'm not that.
I think so many people can identify with that. I can. Because that's my idea of an alcoholic.
Right.
And if your comparison is the gutter alcoholic,
yeah,
well, it's easy for you to scrape by and say, I'm not that, and still
not
have
that.
a pretty significant problem.
Yeah. Yeah, I did for a long time. And eventually it got bad. I never got to where I was homeless or anything like that. I don't know. I always say, I had a high bottom drunk. I had 2 cars in a house and stuff like that. But the other thing I've always said is that maybe it wasn't so high. If you ask my wives, because I had 2 wives and I had 2 different wives go through relapse and go through the problems with me, they had a different view of how high my bottom was. Right? They lived with me a really difficult times. But back to that relationship with my brother. So it was complicated. I remember my brother going to rehab. I remember going to visit him. It was all like in Brookfield, Connecticut somewhere. And again, I remember being sort of uncomfortable with that whole situation. And at that time I did not have a problem. I always drank and partied hard, but I was very much in control of it at that point. You know, when I would drink, I probably would drink too much, but I wasn't drinking all the time. I didn't feel like I needed to drink. I was just a heavy partier, and most of it was good times, and certainly a few times where I overdid it. So I just watched that happen. And then, and again, when we got older, we split up, we went our own ways. We never lived that far. We always lived in the same area, but my brother would be gone. Like, my brother would disappear for months and years at a time, where I wouldn't know where he'd been. He'd be out there running, be out there using, and I wouldn't know where he would be.
In Connecticut, distance can be relative.
Yeah.
To me, the distance between the suburbs of Hartford and Waterbury feel like a different world.
I tell you,
it's about 30-minute drive,
yeah,
maybe?
35, 40 minutes. I've always said that because when we moved out this way, it's like my family never came to visit me, right?
If I cross the river.
Right. They never came. And I said, it's like we moved to a different part of the country, a 40-minute drive away. Nobody ever came out to see us. But that being said, my brother and I, we had a complicated relationship. And what happened was I started to have my own problems, and then I retreated into my own isolation, right? I wasn't like comparing notes to my brother. And actually, I think my brother was still out there using at that time. And I got involved in my own addiction, and actually nobody in my family. I was very much a closet drinker. I was definitely a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Like, I went to all the family functions. You would never be able to tell I had a drinking problem. Never. I would never drink to excess. There were a couple parties that I would at my brother's house or something, but in front of my families and stuff like that, my mom and dad or aunts and uncles, those type of parties, never. I was always that guy, the upstanding, one who had a few drinks and doing well in life. And then I'd go home and, like I said, I'd finish off by drinking in my basement. I started developing my own problems, and then we didn't have a lot of contact for a while, and then slowly he came back into my life via my parents, because he moved in with my parents. My brother was 60. He would have been 67 in July. He died June 2nd, so he died at 66, and he moved in with my parents. He probably lived with my parents for the last, until they passed, for probably close to 15 years or more. And that was somewhat okay. There was some enabling going on there with a lot of parents, as there is. My brother had other mental health issues that he was diagnosed with. So the other problem was when he would go out on his relapses, typically he would stop taking his psych meds, and he would have all kinds of problems. And it was very ugly when he was out there. Like, it wasn't just like a drunk. It was very, very ugly, and at times scary. So it was a really, really difficult relationship that, I tried to manage. I love my brother. I always did, even though there's times that we didn't talk for a long time. I had to distance myself. When I got sober, one of the things I had to do, we talk about it all the times, you have to change everything. And part of that thing is the people who you hang around with. And I share this with a lot of people, and I share it with a lot of men that I sponsor, is that I stopped hanging out with my own brothers, because my own brothers partied in a way that I couldn't deal with, especially in early sobriety. I had to stop going over to their house, my older brothers especially. He would always call, hey, come on over, having pizza. Brian's going to cook pizza. And all of those things were always an excuse to drink heavily. Like, oh yeah, we're going to do a little pizza, but we're going to bang back some tequila shots for sure, right? And so I had to stop doing all of those type of activities, even though they were my own brother, because I couldn't put my own sobriety at risk. So it pushed me away even farther from my brother there, because he really struggled getting sober. And there were times, like, I went to meetings with my brothers on and off for years, on and off. Like, when he was, when he was doing well, he'd be really working the program. I'd go down to Waterbury, we'd go to meetings together, and then all of a sudden he'd be off again, And so it was up and down, up and down, up and down. And it was really, really hard. It was hard on me to get any type of established relationship with him.
I don't have any siblings. I'm an only child. So this is one of these areas that it's tough for me to identify with. And I also find it's tough for me to identify with the idea of having a father because he wasn't around. But I can't imagine the pain of, I can't go and do things with my brother that I'm used to doing because of my sobriety. That's a very difficult decision to make. That's a tough one.
It was hard, especially my oldest brother. My oldest brother and I were probably the closest. My oldest brother is 6 years older than me. It's where I got a lot of my stuff from. Like all my music taste came from my older brother, right? So my older brother was into a lot of the, like he had the Beatle albums, right? And then I would listen to his stuff, right? He had all this stuff and I would listen to it, He was a big Bob Marley fan, and I always tell the story. I went to the 1976 Olympics up in Montreal, and we met some guys from Toronto, and we were partying with these guys from Toronto, and they were playing music in their van. They had a van, and we would go there and party with them at night because we were sleeping in our van, and they had this music on, and I was with my cousin, and we came back home and went up to my brother's house, which was a regular party stop for us, and I walked in the door, and it was the same music, and it was Bob Marley. And after that time, I became a huge Bob Marley fan. So a lot of my stuff from my older brother, we started playing golf together, took golf lessons together. So many things I got from my older brother. It was really, really hard to distance myself from him. I lived with him for about 6 months, him and his wife. So it was really, really hard, but I knew I had to do that. One of the things my older brother had for 25 years, he had a party, actually for more than that. I stopped going after 25 years. He had a party called the Margarita Party. And the Margarita Party was exactly what you think it is. It was a party based around tequila, and we eat Mexican food, and it started out actually at the house he lives in now, which was his sister-in-law's house at the time. He lives there now. And we started there, and it got so big, we moved it around to different parks, and it became a camp out. It literally became like a mini Woodstock. You'd go for a couple of days, you'd camp.
So this is an outdoor party.
It was an outdoor party. And we'd go to different places. Then he moved out to a town called Oxford, Connecticut. And he met this guy who owned a farm who had like a grove. And for the last 5 or 10 years he was there. And it was beautiful. Private place. You go there, you camp out. But it was just exactly what you think. It would be like heavy drinking, heavy drug use for 3 days, That was an incredibly, that's the type of stuff we did, The first time I ever drank tequila, I went up to his apartment. He was, he had all his friends around. They were sitting around, passing around a bottle of tequila. And I remember I was like 17 years old at the time. And me and my buddies went up there in his apartment. And I felt so cool, right? I was 17. These guys were 23 or 24, right? They were passed around, smoking some weed, I'm sure, and just having this good old time. It was really, really difficult for me to pass that up, but I had to. I knew that it was a danger to my sobriety, and when I came into this program after my relapse, I said I was willing to do anything to stay sober, and that's one of the things I had to give up. I can do those things today. I can go to his house today if I chose to. I can go there for whatever, and if everybody wants to drink and get stupid, that's fine, because when I'm ready to go, I just end up leaving, right? I could go there for a while, and then when it gets stupid, I could leave. But early on, I couldn't do that. Early on, I just had to stay away from it completely.
You didn't have tools. You didn't have support yet.
I just didn't understand
you didn't have
it.
a practice.
Yeah. I just didn't understand it, and I was just too fragile, right? I didn't. The obsession hadn't been completely removed. The obsession is gone today. There's a lot of things different today. The obsession is gone. I don't think of drinking as a release. I don't, even on my worst days, I don't think I should have a drink because I'll feel better. We talked about it Friday night, or was it Monday night? One of the, I get my meetings mixed up. But we talk about, alcoholics drinks because they like the effects of alcohol, right? And I said at this meeting, whatever meeting it was, I still like the effects of alcohol. My brain still tells me that I like that effect. Now, I know I can't drink. I don't want to drink. I know the damage it brings. But that feeling that I get from alcohol, yeah, I still like that. I have an alcoholic mind. It still wants to tell me that that's what it feels, right? And that's why if I don't work my program, I will absolutely be in danger of drinking again. So,
just for the sake of the new person, when you're saying work your program, give me a brief. What does that look like?
For me, working my program means several things. It means going to my regular meetings, right? I've got 2 regular meetings that I go to every week without fail. There's typically a third one. Now, I do this podcast, which I consider sort of a recovery event, if not a meeting. So that's 3 things I do every single week. Okay. And then I do other things too. Like there's other meetings. Last week, I think I went to 5 meetings, right? Just the way it went. I was supposed to go away last week and it never happened. So I packed in a couple of extra meetings, a Tuesday and a Thursday, because I expected to be going Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and back on Monday. Well, I never went, so I was able to go to my regular Friday meeting. So I ended up going to a meeting Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Yeah, Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, right? And then I went out. Oh, and then I went out to Timmy's on Saturday. So yeah, I went to a bunch of meetings. So that's five meetings last week. That's the kind of stuff. I talk to alcoholics all the time, right? I mean, I got a couple alcoholics that we text back and forth in the morning. That's another thing that I do regularly. And then I work on prayer and meditation. I work on that quiet time, whatever that means to you. It means different stuff to everybody, but to me, it means quiet time, relaxing my mind, just finding some really, really quiet time that I don't feel stressed,
It sounds like this is about the habits that you've built into your life. It doesn't have to be 5 meetings a week, but it can be what is the regular practice that you're doing to stay connected. Having a group of people you can trust is important, and that can be phone calls, that can be texts, and then the self-care that you do. Not a heavy lift, but you have these regular lifestyle habits you have in place, and this puts you in a place where you don't have to be so tempted by alcohol that you have to drink.
Yeah. There's a huge thing, right? We both do the AA program of recovery. And part of that AA program, we talk about on this all the time, is a fellowship, right? And I do meetings. You and I talked about a lot. We did the Joe and Charlie, and it's not so much I wanted to do Joe and Charlie again, but the people who we did Joe and Charlie with were really, really people that I wanted to go spend every night with, once a week, every night with. And actually some of those people I would see more than that, right? And it's the same thing. It's funny because Tim now goes to the Monday night meeting. So it's funny, like I saw Tim 3 times last week, right? But those are the people that I do want to see, right? Those are the people that I want to see a lot on a regular basis, because those are the connections I need to keep me sober. Those are the relationships that I have that keep me sober. And the thing that I have with my program is that when I have a night where there's nothing going on, like my friend Bruce and I were talking about it, and it's like, if I'm not doing anything, and I feel like, what am I doing tonight? Oh, nothing. If it's a Thursday night, then there's a good chance I'm going to shoot over and hit the Thursday night meeting, because I like meeting those guys. I like hearing the stories from those guys. I just never know what I'm going to hear at a meeting that's going to help me. So a lot of times I just go, I show up, I sit there. I always try to participate somehow, but I want to stay connected to that. And that was one of the things my brother struggled with. He could not stay connected to the program. He had some really, really good sobriety at times. He had some really good connections. He had people who helped him out a lot, but he just couldn't stay connected to it. I don't know. One of the things I talked about, and I don't even remember, you said to me when we were going to do this last week, I liked what you shared. And I think you said that to me Tuesday. And Tuesday, which was the day after I shared, I couldn't even have told you what I shared that night. Like, I had no recollection.
I could tell you were on fire.
Right. Well, I had no recollection of what I shared. I do remember it. I talked about my brother, but I had no recollection exactly what I said. But I will say this about him, is that this is what happened between my brother and I, is that my brother moved in with my parents, and then my mom died, and it was just my brother and my dad. And that was a good thing, because it gave my dad somebody to live with, right? And even though my brother wasn't perfect, and he wasn't he was clean, he was clean and sober back then, it gave my dad, I knew my dad had somebody. So that gave all of, had 5 brothers and sisters, 6 of us. So that gave all of us, knowing that my dad had somebody living with him, it was a good thing. And that went well. And then my dad passed away, and it was just my brother. My older brother and I ended up buying my parents' house, and we let my brother live there. It was a two-family. Let him live on the first floor for a while. But it became very apparent to us that my brother couldn't take care of himself. He couldn't keep the house clean. He couldn't really manage a lot of stuff that had to be managed. I went down there. I tried to help him several times, and it became very apparent to us that he couldn't. So we ended up getting him into like an assisted living spot down in Waterbury. And that went well for a while. Until he met a woman, and he went on another patented run, and he went out and started using again. And that was really, really ugly. And I had done a lot of work. I had gotten very close to him. I was doing meetings with him. I was picking him up. I was seeing him. And that was a really nasty run where he had some really bad things. He did some really bad things. I just decided I couldn't have him in my life at that time. Like, that was, again, one of those things, self-preservation, self-care. I needed to distance myself. And my brother was diabetic, and he started to have issues from that. And he started to, typically with diabetics, started to lose, appendages, feet, toes, first of all toes, and then half a foot, and then he had the bottom portion of his leg below the knee amputated, and actually above the knee, now I think about it, amputated. And all through that time I had no contact with him. I knew it was happening. I have a sister in Ohio who was talking to him in that time, who would give me that news. Hey, Brother Rich is in the hospital. He's having, a half a foot removed. And I'm like, okay, thanks for the information. Never would go see him. Never would do anything because we were estranged, right? It really was. And then all that went through that. And about 2 years ago, I said to my wife, I started feeling this pull to get back into his life. And I was reluctant to do it. I really was, because I had done it so many times. And I said to my wife, I feel like I got to call. We called him Richie. I said, I feel like I got to call Richie and get back into his life. Like, I felt like I owed that to my parents, because my mother was always worried about him. Because like I said, he had some other issues. My mother was always worried what was going to happen to him, like most parents are. And I started out very slowly with him. I started out texting him, and he was so happy to hear from me, and it went and slowly went back. And then I slowly started, I would go down to see him. He was living in Naugatuck, about 35, 40 minutes away. Just spend a couple hours with him, just try to see how we can do it. And I did. We slowly started making up this relationship. And then last year, around his birthday, a year ago, July, I went down there to help him celebrate his birthday. And he had a really bad day. And he was having a really bad day for a lot of reasons. And I had to leave. I told him, like, Rich, I can't do this today. I had a bad day myself, but I just couldn't go down this rabbit hole that he was in. I got to leave. And he really got upset because it was his birthday and all. And we had another falling out. And there was lots of nasty text messages, not from me. I don't send nasty things back to him, but he sent a lot of nasty text messages to me, told me he didn't need me, all that kind of stuff. And again, we were on the outs again. But here's what I did. Here's one of the things I said about this relationship is I never had a resentment towards him. Like, even though I was distancing myself from him, this program had allowed me to take that distance without judgment, without resentment. Okay. So I was always ready to get back to a relationship with him when he was ready. And finally, he wrote me some texts like, hey, did this one thing Dad always told me is I had to forgive and this and that. So again, we started back up. And this is all in the last, like I said, July, it was probably the end of last year, October, November, that we started slowly getting back into it. And again, we started back to relationship. And it was a little bit more distance this time. I wasn't going to see him as much because I just wanted to keep our distance. But we ended up in a really, really good place. And it was really super nice that I talked about it. I would talk to him for the last couple months, probably the last 3 months. I talked to my brother 2 to 4 times a week, every week. Okay? Every week. He'd call me up. We were both fairly early riser. He would call me about 7 o'clock in the morning or 7:30. Sometimes I'd already be out walking the dog. And we'd have a quick little conversation. He'd be telling me what's going on. We're both sports fans. We'd be talking a little bit about sports. And it was really, really nice, that I had that relationship. And one of the things I shared is that I'm so pleased that upon his passing, we were at that place rather than the estranged place. Because it would have been really hard for me to think, oh my God, I lost my brother and I'm not even sure he knew that I loved him. Because one of the things we always said, and I always told him, we both said it when we hung up the phone, I love you, brother. I'll talk to you later. And that was it, And I was just so pleased that this program had given me the ability to be able to allow myself to be there for him, and in that time. So it was tough. It was tough. My brother was not healthy. He was overweight. He had lost his leg. He wasn't active. Didn't, even though he had a prosthetic leg, he didn't use it. He'd stayed in his wheelchair most of the day. I would go down there, and I would take him out to do some shopping, go to Walmart and stuff like that. And he could move from a cart, from a seat, and to use his walker, but not much at all. He had a heart attack in December, and went in, and they talked about open heart surgery. They put some stents in, and then he came home, and then he had a heart attack on, like I said, June 2nd, and I'm not surprised. And I told people all the time, I'm not surprised that my brother died of a heart attack. I didn't expect him to live all that long, but I didn't expect it to happen 2 weeks ago, Right. That's all. I mean, it wasn't a total shock, but it wasn't something that I was expecting that day. And I guess I would never be expecting it on any day, unless he had something was in the hospital. But he had a massive heart attack, and by the time help got there, I found out after the fact that he was already dead.
I would imagine, I'm thinking through the challenges of not having that resentment, because I have some people in my life like that, and I don't really want a relationship with them. I'm away from them because they are unhealthy. But it is boggling my mind not to have had that resentment. That's a higher level of enlightenment that I guess I have with other people. But it is your brother.
Yeah.
And you have that shared experience.
But something, Matt, I'll tell you this, is I've been able to do that with other people, not relatives. We have a person that we both know has been in and out of the rooms. And I was helping him and sponsoring him for a while. And recently, and I know he was out, and then he couldn't stay sober, and I was like, okay, well, I guess I can't help you. And other people tried to help him, and then he stopped. He seemed to stop going to AA, but he recently reached out to me, and we started texting each other. Actually, I text him. I would kept texting him every once in a while. I would text him, and here's the point: is I don't know if this guy's even sober, but I've allowed myself to be available to talk to him. And he even asked me, and he's doing some meetings and stuff, and he comes to where I live in Manchester to do some meetings. And he says, hey, can we get together once in a while? I'm like, yeah, sure. It's the same thing. I make myself available to him. I'm not trying to sponsor him. I'm not trying to help him. Truth is, I don't even care if he's sober or not. But I'm willing to make myself available to him in the hopes that one day he'll be able to get this program and find it. And because I'm not saying, no, I don't want to be around you because you won't do this program, I just, I don't have any resentment to him. I know how hard it is to get sober. I do. It was really hard for me to get sober, I spent 14 years in not drinking, and I realized I struggled. I knew I wasn't sober. I just wasn't drinking, And so I don't know. It was a blessing. It really was. I agree that when he died, I was so pleased that I was in such a good place. I really was. And not only that, one of the things I shared is that I was one of 6, okay? This is the 3rd sibling I've lost, okay? He was not quite 67 years old, and he was the oldest one, right? So I've lost 3 siblings younger than 67 years old. So it's been difficult. It's been difficult with that. And one of the things that's happened was all of his all of the stuff around his death, all of the work, all the stuff working with getting his remains taken care of, that all fell on me. Emptying out his apartment fell on me. And I did it all. And again, I did it without a resentment. Even though I have a brother who lives close, my oldest brother lives closer to him than I do. It's just not something that he would jump up. Matter of fact, I told him, like, I went down there with my cousin and we emptied out the apartment. Well, why didn't you tell me? I'm like, and I said to my wife, like, it's your brother too, right? Right. I'm like, I'm supposed to have to call you up. Like, why aren't you calling me and saying, hey, what do we need to do?
You're not his mom.
Again, it's like, that's him. He's never been around. He doesn't like death. I mean it. Like, when both my parents died and both my sisters died, he was nowhere to be found. Not because he didn't care, because he doesn't like to be around death. For some reason, it doesn't bother me. I mean it. Like, both my sisters, I was there when they died. My mom and dad. My dad, I wasn't. My dad was the only one. But I don't have a problem. I never had a problem with my mother-in-law. My mother-in-law came into my house the last few weeks of her life and stayed with us. And my brother doesn't like that. And I respect that. He doesn't need to. He doesn't need to be part of it. But my point is, I'm able to do all of this stuff without resentment, without feeling like I'm being put upon. Before I got this program, I would have been pissed off. Mm-hmm. I would have been like, why me? Why do I have to do all this stuff? But today I could do it with a grateful heart. I can do it. My brother didn't have much. My brother lives on Social Security, disability, and Social Security. Really, it's amazing. It's amazing how little money he lived on. And it's amazing how little money some people in this great country of ours live on. My brother lived on less than $13,000 a year.
That's incredible.
Yeah. And now obviously he got some subsidized rent and food stamps and stuff like this, but less than $13,000. And my sister in Ohio helped him a lot too. And there's lots of people out there, trying to live. And he was right. And here's the other thing I'll say about my brother, and I'm long-winded on this, but my brother was happy when he died. He had gotten an apartment. It was all by himself. The last place he was in was sort of like a multi-unit, almost like an assisted living. He had his own apartment, but it was very small, like a one-room apartment. And when he got this place, he was thrilled. And I always offered him, I'm like, Rich, I'll take over your finances whenever you want. Whenever you want, I'll take them over. You won't have to worry. And I said, I guarantee you'll actually have more money if you let me take over your finances. But he didn't want to. He wanted to do it on his own. He was very proud that he could do all that stuff on his own. He was saying to my sister, he's like, I finally feel like I'm an adult, right? He was like handling his finance, paying his bills, paying his rent, doing all those things. And he was really, really happy, even though he lived on such little money. So I was happy that that's the way he ended his life. He had a big faith. He really did. He had a Christian faith. He was doing some Bible studies, turned out to be, and again, it doesn't matter who they are, but for him, it turned out to be some Jehovah's Witnesses came, knocked on his door, and they started taking him and would meet with him and read the Bible with him, and he's always was a good Christian. He always went to church. He went to churches that were Bible churches, so he was we would talk about that. Hey, I was just reading this, It's not my thing anymore, but it was his thing, so I was still able to talk about it.
Give him comfort.
It gave him very much a lot of comfort. It gave him a lot of comfort. And it gave him comfort that he feels like, okay, I know where I'm going, right? I know where I'm going. I was very pleased that he had that in his life.
I'm sure that connecting with you at the end of his life was probably also helpful.
I think it was. I'll tell you, it was great for both of us. He was really pleased. We were only 2 years apart, so we grew up a lot. We grew up together. And we did a lot of our partying together. A lot of that stuff was done early on. My brother, we grew up when drinking age was 18, so he was 2 years older. So he was legally drinking when I was still 16. And so a lot of times I got my alcohol through him, Hey, Rich, can you buy me some beer? Hey, Rich, can you do this, right? So we did a lot of that kind of stuff growing up together. So a lot of good brother stuff. And then, obviously drugs and alcohol get in, and it really could ruin some stuff.
I thought this would be a great topic for people because I think there's a lot here that you can relate to. This is a common topic within families, whether it's the same situation or whether you have a family issue or somebody's sober, somebody's not sober. There's a lot here that you can identify with. And I could identify with the feeling even if I don't have a brother or sister. Mm-hmm. So I really appreciate you being vulnerable to share that because I think it's going to help the next person.
I hope so.
We have a few people who this show has helped. And every time that you email me at matt@soberfriendspod.com, I'm always grateful. And it's always something that helps me, so I figured I'd share it with you. Got an email from Rob G. Rob is 19 days sober. He's been binge listening to all of the podcasts. Not sure why. I feel like it's important for you guys to know the podcast helps me stay sober one day at a time. With every episode, I feel like I come away with more and more tools to add to my sobriety tool belt. Thanks so much for the work and the service it takes to produce the podcast. Thanks, Rob G. Rob, I am humbled that you reached out to us and that at 19 days sober, this is something that helps you and that we've offered you value. That's fantastic. And then we got a very far-flung one from Denmark. I think the name is Steen or Stina, if I remember my Danish, but I'm going to go Steen. So Matt and friends, just wanted to give you guys a huge shout out from Denmark. As you mentioned traveling over here in your last episode, I've been listening to all your episodes. They're a big part of me staying sober for nearly 15 months now. Another relatively new guy, one day at a time. Thank you so much for the great content. I really appreciate it, Steen. I'm going to have to look and see whereabouts in Denmark he's from. Semi-related story. One of these times that I went over there, a group of 10 of us cleared the bar of, we put, I think, a $3,000 to $5,000 tab one night for the drinking that we did over there, which is not much to do in Denmark during the winter in the place that I was in, which is in the middle of Jutland, not near Copenhagen. It was in a place that there's nothing around. But I don't think I've ever been drunker in my life than on those trips to Denmark.
Yeah.
I'm impressed with people like that because he probably knows like multiple languages.
Yeah. It just blows my mind that we sit here in our little homes in Connecticut and we talk, you and I talk on it's like we're having a phone conversation, just you and I. And then somebody in Denmark listened to us and got something out of it. Thank you so much for reaching out. I will tell you, you don't know how much that means to us that we can, trudge down these hallways to get to these microphones and do this podcast. But in reality, it means so much.
Right.
And it's so amazing to me that this little podcast reaches Denmark. So hang in there, keep listening. God bless, and keep going one day at a time. Stay sober.
If you want to reach us, the website is soberfriendspod.com, Instagram and Facebook at soberfriendspod. We love to hear from you. And if you go to soberfriendspod.com, sign up for the newsletter so you can stay in touch with us. Steve, thanks for another great show.
Hey, Matt, thank you.
We'll see you next week. Bye, everybody.
You made it this far into the podcast. That tells me you're a pretty big fan. If you like what we do and you find value in the podcast, consider a donation at buymeacoffee.com/soberfriendspod. Your donation keeps us on the air to help out the new guy and helps us defray some of our costs. If you find value in our podcast, please consider a donation at buymeacoffee.com/soberfriendspod.